Hello everyone and welcome back. Here is a curious and fascinating fact. Britain, America, and Israel share a special relationship. These three nations share an alliance that is totally unique. This special relationship, it's out there for everyone to see. Everyone can tell that Britain, America, and Israel are linked together. Welsh families in Tennessee, Cornish families in Milwaukee, Londoners in Chicago, West Midlanders in remote, Jews in New York, Glasgow, and Birmingham, American children who learn more about the Hebrews than they do about 19th century America, the Israeli Prime Minister speaking to Congress, large numbers of Americans and Britons visiting and even living in Israel. Everyone can see it, the Brazilians, the Chinese, the Russians, even the Arabs, even the terrorists can see it. This is a special relationship, and it exists specifically between these three countries. This is a bond that goes way past trade deals or defense treaties. This is three interlocking, intertwined cultures and histories. It's like these three are brothers. This is a special relationship indeed. It has existed for decades, and in fact, it's existed for thousands of years. In fact, it is a brotherhood. But that special relationship, that brotherhood, is now breaking, and everyone is beginning to see it. In March, Israeli voters reaffirmed their support for their Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and of course a few weeks ago, British voters did the same thing with Prime Minister David Cameron. Both countries gave their conservatives big election victories. Britain and Israel are two of the world's freest, most democratic countries. They stand out from other countries for their rule of law, for their concepts of justice, for their protections of liberty. Those values lock them in, shoulder to shoulder, with the United States. At least that's what you would think. But that's not what's happening. In so many ways, the U.S. leadership has instead pushed Britain and Israel away. Why is this happening? Well, I'd like to begin the program today by looking to Winston Churchill. This takes us back to a speech that he gave in 1946. This is just 9 months after he was not re-elected as Prime Minister in Britain. And he made a trip here to the United States and gave a speech at Fulton, Missouri, a small college there. And it became known as the Iron Curtain speech, one of his most famous post-war speeches. And so this is what he said, March the 5th, 1946.
Now, while still pursuing the method of realizing our overall strategic concept, I come to the crux of what I have traveled here to say. Neither the sure prevention of war nor the continuous rise of world organization will be gained without what I have called the fraternal association of the English-speaking people. This means a special relationship between the British Commonwealth and Empire and the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no time for generality, and I will venture to be precise. Fraternal association requires not only the growing friendship and mutual understanding between our two vast but kindred systems of society, but the continuance of the intimate relations between our military advisors, leading to common study of potential danger, the similarity of weapons and manuals of instruction, and to the interchange of officers and cadets at technical colleges.
So it was during this Iron Curtain speech where he coined this phrase, special relationship. He talked about this fraternal association between these two nations, the United States and Britain. And not long after that speech, of course, if you know your Israeli history, it was these two nations, the U.S. and Britain, who were primarily responsible for establishing the little Jewish state in the Middle East. These three together, speaking of Israel and the establishment of that state, it was the historian Martin Gilbert who said early on the Israelis even expressed a desire, some of them, to join the British Commonwealth. That's how close these ties were. In 1955, Churchill himself wrote, "Israel is a force in the world and a link with the USA." That was in 1955, just a few years into Israel as a state. It's a force in the world, a link, he said, with the United States. Let me show you what President Kennedy said. This is from 1962. He said, "The United States has a special relationship with Israel in the Middle East, really comparable only to what it has with Britain over a wide range of affairs." See, just like I said at the top, it's there for everyone to see. Certainly when you look back in history, a generation or two. It's very different today, as we're seeing. But you look back over the 20th century, this brotherhood among three peoples, the Americans, the British, the Israelis, it's been especially close, even back beyond that. The last 2 centuries, you could say, even before the Jews had a state, there still was this very close connection. In fact, if you look into your Bible, if you look into this wonderful book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, you can see that these nations, God actually had a hand in establishing these nations. My father's written before, for example, about all these end-time prophecies talking about the Jewish state and how that for them to be fulfilled, the division of Jerusalem, for instance, spoken of in Zechariah 14, for that to be fulfilled, there had to be a Jewish state in the first place. God had a hand. But look at what you see today. Even if you don't follow the Trumpet.com or our Trumpet magazine, even if you're not a subscriber, you can look at these three today, and particularly in Britain and in the United States, and see what is obviously an astonishing free fall, a decline in power and influence. And you look over at the Middle East and you see all of these enemy powers pushing up hard against Israel. In some ways, I guess they're preoccupied with fights amongst themselves. But still, what a neighborhood that little state of Israel is in. What a dangerous neighborhood. This is from an article, May the 8th, 2015. You can see the title there, "The Amazing Decline of America's Special Relationships." Notice that, plural, and you can only guess who they're talking about. It says, Mr. Cameron stunned the pundits. This is following up on the British elections a few weeks back. Mr. Cameron stunned the pundits to a degree that echoes the recent electoral victory of Bibi Netanyahu in the elections in Israel, the country that, along with the UK, has historically had the greatest claim on having a special relationship with the United States. You see, as I say, everyone can see it. Everyone. It says both elections, however, suggest on several levels that those special relationships, neither of which has been what it used to be during the past several years, are in for a period of further decline. Everyone can now see this. These relationships are deteriorating, and they're in for a period of further decline. Now, going back to the Trumpet, thetrumpet.com, if you have been reading what we've said in recent years, even over the last 2 decades, if you have subscribed to the Trumpet magazine, then you know that we've been preparing you for this. When we come back after the break, we'll go to scriptures that we've been telling you about for years, describing this deterioration, describing this further decline, as is brought out in this particular piece. It continues, in part, the decline in the relationships has been due to historical reasons that have made both countries less important to the United States. The United Kingdom is a shadow of its former self, the sun long ago having defied the old saying and actually having set on the former empire. British school children no longer study maps that show a quarter of the world in red or pink to depict the lands loyal to their monarch. See, they've given up the empire, and even as it brings out there, now children today aren't even studying that glorious history. So many in academia are ashamed of it. They're embarrassed by it. They're turning inward. They've abandoned their history. It continues. Perhaps the fact that puts this decline in clearest focus is the steep decline in the size of the British Army, with cuts slated to take it from 102,000 to 82,000 regulars, and a recent report suggesting that further cuts could reduce it in size to 50,000 within a few years. We face the prospect that in the not-too-distant future, the military that once conquered the world will be roughly the same size as the New York Police Department. How about that for a military, as it brings out, that once conquered the world, the whole world? And now look at it. It's dwindling to a size that's smaller than the New York Police Department. What does that say about this remarkable decline that's set in? The United States is not far behind. It says further, similarly, whereas a generation ago Israel was seen as central to U.S. Mideast policy, today, while it is still America's most important and best supported ally in the region, events have undercut its importance in practical terms. And the article goes on and talks about just all the other issues that the U.S. is trying to contend with or deal with in the United States, with war going on in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, trying to contain Iran, trying to work out a deal, a nuclear deal with Iran, trying to prevent the spread of extremism, the ongoing conflicts in Libya, in Yemen. You can see why Israel is largely forgotten amid all of this chaos. But that relationship certainly is deteriorating for sure, the relationship between Israel and the United States. It says further, both special relationships are fading in the minds and hearts of Americans as a new generation starts assuming power, one that has few memories of the historical reasons for the founding of Israel or of Britain's vital partnership with the United States in 2 world wars. See, in other words, we're just simply forgetting our history. We're forgetting about how special this relationship was and why it was so important to preserving a certain amount of order in this world. And as we see these relationships unraveling and chaos spreading all over the world, do you think there's any connection between these two developments? The United States, for example, pulling out of the Middle East, and chaos everywhere that you look. Finally, it says here, will the next U.S. president aggressively seek to reverse the course of these once crucial but now declining relationships cited here? Undoubtedly, candidates for that job will certainly promise to do so in the months ahead, but the historical factors and current geopolitical trends cited above will make it very hard for anyone to restore these relationships to the special place they occupied in the past. For Cameron and Netanyahu and their new governments, this is a reality they may wish to deny, but that they will find it very difficult to reverse. It's irreversible. It's irreversible. It's not going to turn around. That's what he's saying there. It's just going to get worse. We're in for a period of further decline. Now, this is all spoken of. This is all talked about in this wonderful book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. You can call the number on your screen to obtain your free copy of this wonderful book, or just text us. If you're in the UK, you can text us at 80800 and ask for this, because it not only talks about the rise in power that we've seen in the past few centuries of the United States and Britain, and of course Judah, or the little nation of Israel today, is also talked about at length in here as well, but it talks more toward the end about this stunning decline in power and even this unraveling relationship between these three peoples. We'll be right back.
Britain, America, and Israel share a special relationship. Over and over again, Britain, America, and the Jewish people have stood shoulder to shoulder. The fact that Britain, America, and Israel share a special bond is self-evident. But why? Even the casual student of history can see that these three nations are tightly linked. Yet even the most advanced historians do not understand why. Britain, America, and Israel are very different countries with very different histories. One is old, an Atlantic island that was once the world's greatest empire. One is young, a new world nation that became the world's greatest superpower. One is even younger, a tiny Middle East outpost belonging to an ancient race. Yet these three nations share the same character, the same values, and the same law. Even among the Western democracies, Britain, America, and Israel have stood out as nations that share a special relationship. It is as though they are three tribes of the same nation, three descendants of the same patriarch, three brothers of the same family. Find out why America, Britain, and Israel share a special relationship. Find out these nations' incredible history and their immediate future. Request The United States and Britain in Prophecy by Herbert W. Armstrong.
In The United States and Britain in Prophecy, Mr. Armstrong talked about a staggering turn in world events that we need to prepare for. He wrote, of course, the original version of this book back in the 1940s and updated it and expanded it over the years. And that book went to 6 million people. 6 million people requested it over the course of the 20th century. It was his most popular book. And he talked about this staggering turn. He wrote it at a time when, well, even if the sun was beginning to set on the British Empire, you had the United States coming out of World War II as the single great superpower in the world. And Mr. Armstrong said, be prepared for a staggering turn in events. And we're now witnessing that. We're now seeing it happen. As so many of these articles that I'm quoting from bring out. Here's another one. This is the Weekly Standard. Notice this title, America's Collapsing Alliances. Again, plural, more than one. And this one talks not as much about Britain and Israel, but other alliances in the Middle East, like with Saudi Arabia, elsewhere. It says, in July 2008, presidential candidate Barack Obama made big, bold news by traveling to Berlin to, as the New York Times triumphantly recorded, restore the world's faith in strong American leadership and idealism. You remember this speech, as it goes on and says there, 200,000 people, 200,000 Berliners turned out. It was a euphoric scene. So much hope, so much excitement, so much anticipation. And it was all about strengthening America's alliances, strengthening America's position in the world. It says with 200,000 Berliners waving campaign-provided American flags, Mr. Obama called for renewing America's alliances and undoing the cowboy unilateralism of George W. Bush and Obama's 2008 opponent, Senator John McCain. It says the events of recent months are an indication of how spectacularly Mr. Obama has failed to fulfill his 2008 promise. I mean, this has been a spectacular failure. That's the truth. It says over 6 years in office, Barack Obama has gone a long way to unraveling the alliances, both formal and informal, that have been the framework for American geopolitical leadership since the end of World War II. I mean, we see alliances just unraveling all over the place, and chief among them, that with the British Empire, or what was the British Empire, Britain, the United Kingdom, and the little Middle Eastern nation of Israel. All these alliances. And we've talked a lot about this. This is one example. You can see written back in 2009. This was at the Trumpet. The coming of the Obama administration has mortally wounded the natural symbiosis of diplomacy between Britain and America. This is a radical departure from the 200 years of mutual support and cooperation between the U.S. and Britain, particularly in matters of defense and security. It goes against what we've seen for 200 years. Wow. That's, to paraphrase Mr. Armstrong again, that's a staggering turn in world events, wouldn't you say? And the Bible talks all about it. Did you know that? The Bible talks all about it. That's why you need this book. It'll help you with your Bible study, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. Be one of the many millions of people around the world that have read and studied this book. We'll send it out to you free of charge. There's no cost, no obligation, nothing. We'd like for you to read it and study it. Just send in your request. Well, like Mr. Fraser brought out there, the Blair Bush years were like the swan song for this strong connection. And just as God prophesied about this relationship, about the strength and the power of the empire and the single great nation of the United States, so too did God talk about our simultaneous decline. I just want to quote to you from Isaiah 9. It's on the board here. This is from the New King James Version, a little bit of a different translation than the King James. It says, Manasseh shall devour Ephraim, and Ephraim Manasseh, together they shall be against Judah. Now you need to get this book, as I say, so that you can understand all the terms and the names and so on. Manasseh refers to the United States prophetically. Ephraim is Britain, and Judah, that's the Jews, or the little nation that's called Israel in the Middle East. And this verse here says, Manasseh shall devour Ephraim, and Ephraim devour Manasseh, and together they go against Judah. They're fighting, in other words. It's a brotherly fight. It's a brotherly dispute. There's family division. And that's what we see happening. That's a perfect description of what we see in the world today, happening between the United States, Britain, and Israel. I mean, historically, as we've covered here today, these have been strong allies. What a unique and special relationship this has been. And now we see that relationship unraveling. And simultaneously, along with that, chaos spreading all over the world, in Africa, in the Middle East, on the streets of America, in Europe, all over the place. Let's look at Zechariah 11. If you haven't been reading along, go and get your Bible and read these verses with me. See what God says about what's happening right now. This is Zechariah 11 and verse 14. It says, Then I cut asunder my other staff, even bands, that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. Israel, of course, referring to both Ephraim and Manasseh, all of the Israelites. The band, you see, that held that brotherhood together. It's been broken. It's been broken. And just as sure as everyone could see how special that relationship was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, now everyone can see that that band is broken. That these brothers are no longer defending one another, supporting each other, strengthening those ties. One last passage here in the book of Hosea, also in the Minor Prophets here. Hosea chapter 5, a very, very important prophecy that we've referred to quite often over the years, and will a lot more as we draw closer to the return of Jesus Christ. So many of these prophecies, they're leading right into just some staggering events. To, again, quote what Mr. Armstrong said there, this is Hosea 5, verse 13. It says, When Ephraim saw his sickness, and Judah saw his wound, then went Ephraim to the Assyrian. That's talking about Germany, modern-day Germany. Ephraim went to the Assyrian and sent to King Jareb, yet could he not heal you nor cure you of your wound. So with respect to Israel, the little nation in the Middle East, I mean, that wound for them has been the peace process. They've been wounded. There's great sickness in Ephraim, in Britain today, as they turn inward and try to deal with all of their internal problems. And then, of course, there's a great sickness in the United States, so much so that they're not even mentioned here. When Ephraim and Judah run into trouble, they go to Germany for help and support, not the U.S. Why? Because the U.S. is out of the picture by this point. Because the U.S. is even sicker than both of them. That's what we're facing. Back up not one verse, a few verses. Verse 5, it says, "And the pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity, and Judah shall fall with them." Not that I want to finish on a negative note here, but the simultaneous fall of these three is prophesied in the pages of your Bible. The hope, though, is that these unraveling ties, it does lead to a storm in the short run, but it triggers a number of other prophecies that will lead right into the return of Jesus Christ to this earth. And in fact, there's many other prophecies that talk about Israelites, including the Jews, being, after this period of turmoil and tribulation, being regathered, brought together, reunited. We can look forward to that. That too, by the way, is discussed in this wonderful book. Make sure you stay tuned so that you can get all the information you need to request Herbert Armstrong's masterful work, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time.